guys, Danny here again. Put up a poll on the Instagram page, and a lot of you guys had mentioned that you were interested in the concept of a catch can. So today, we're going to be taking a look at how I ran this catch can, as well as why you would run a catch can, and we'll just kind of talk about it. So, first off is why you would run a catch can. And this goes for any car, not this 2.5 liter M272 in my C230 here. Specifically, really targeting in this explanation a M272 powered car in terms of how I did it, but PCV ventilation and running a catch can really applies to any car that has a PCV system. So to expand on that a little bit, what the PCV system serves to do essentially is to relieve pressure built in the crankcase. So as a piston goes down, it has rings around the top of the piston head, the flat surface that all the combustion takes place on top of. So it goes down, and then as it comes back up on the compression stroke, pressure builds as air fills the gap above it, essentially, and the piston compresses upwards. So a lot of what keeps that extra pressure from building is the ringlands, which go around the head of the piston and help to create a clean seal between the walls of the cylinder lining, and the piston head itself. So as they come from the factory, those rings are going to have a little bit of a clearance because some pressure is going to need to get by the top of the piston head. But as things wear and tolerances loosen a little bit, it's not atypical for a little bit extra air to start getting by. So effectively, you're going to see that in your PCV system. The PCV system itself, as I mentioned, helps to relieve some of that pressure that's built in the crankcase. So if we're taking a look at this M272 specifically, there's actually two parts to the PCV system. So one we can easily see, it is right here. So this unit goes on top of the valve cover. As pressure builds, it comes up through here, and you get kind of an oily residue, like a oily air, essentially, that runs into this line, back, and into the top of the throttle body. And alternatively, not going to be able to see it, I don't think, but in one of my previous videos, we did the oil drip pan and the oil drip tray. So those are right back here on an M272, at least the US spec one. And that does the same thing essentially, but this is actually the high load side. So when the engine is under high strain, it's going to rely a little bit more on this side to vent the pressure, and that additionally goes straight into the air intake boot, which is right underneath the MAF there, which curves down into the throttle body. So that is two different points on this engine where the pressure from the crankcase is being ventilated. The reason this is worth mentioning on a Mercedes M272 specifically is, as I've mentioned in numerous other videos, the flaps in the intake manifold runners, or the swirl flaps, tend to fail quite often. And most typically the culprit of that is excessive oil buildup that kind of sludges, and it eventually keeps the flaps from moving and causes some plastic somewhere to break until, or resulting in a check engine light, reduced performance, and typically a $700 repair bill just for an OEM manifold. So you can see I did the SLK 350 suspension body code, whatever, M014. So that's the sport with the upgraded intake manifold, cams, etc. We've gone over this in other videos. So this doesn't have flaps in it, so I never have to worry about that failing again. However, I personally don't love the idea of my engine burning oil because that can result in buildup of just oily residue all over the pistons, etc. But additionally, I want to be able to monitor the health of my engine and how much oil it is burning. So off of the high load part of the system, the PCV system back there, I ran an oil catch can. So you can see the lines kind of snaking up, and they come up to the front. This is disconnected, but that's the intake pipe. And then you can kind of see in there, I've got this little oil catch can. Held in pretty loose, kind of botched together. I have an autocross tomorrow, and I did this in a span of like 2 days after I signed up for the event, just because I really want to start keeping an eye on it, because I suspect this car is still burning a little extra oil even after I did the drip pan. Still have yet to do that front part of the PCV. I actually have the part in the car, but I'm not at my house right now, and you need male Do you? No, you need female Torx sockets, and I only have male sockets here. So that won't be getting done. However, the catch can is run, and I'm going to pause briefly and grab a flashlight and show you guys the slightly cobbled together work that I did to make this work, and we're going to discuss it. Okay, we are back here with a flashlight this time. So there's my oil catch can, held in incredibly haphazardly because this is a very cheap Amazon spec catch can. So whereas a normal one might have a nice bracket where you could sit it right underneath that bolt head or on top of that ground or something like that, this one has a very awkward bracket at the back rather than coming off of the top. So ultimately what I kind of had to do, because surprisingly, despite this only being the 2.5 liter, this is pretty tight engine bay and it's pretty crowded. Can't really put it back here because that is your carbon filter or charcoal filter for the interior. Can't put it over there because the brake master is over there, as well as your fuses, etc., etc. Coolant reservoir, it keeps going. So I found this little metal bracket back here. You can't really see it, but I literally have this thing zip tied in because I just need it to get me through this weekend, and then I'll find a permanent solution. Probably make my own bracket out of some cheap sheet metal, something, buy a bracket, I don't know. But where this comes into discussion is picking the catch can for your car. So this, as I said, is an Amazon spec one, and besides the fact that it's annoying to work with in terms of mounting, another point of that is the way that it works. So typically a good quality catch can like Mishimoto or Forge Motorsport, I believe, makes them, etc., whether it's a Miata, a Honda, a Volkswagen, Subaru, you name it, they will typically have a little filter built in. So basically, as I had mentioned with relieving the pressure, the way this one works is there's a feed hose from the back of the motor right down there that comes up, goes in, flows into here. So in here, it's a little bit cooler, and that's that oily air coming in. So as it's a little bit cooler, the oil condenses, sits in the can, and clean air flows back. That one goes into the throttle body, where it would normally be getting oily residue. The idea is to get clean air out of the crankcase anyways. So a filtered one, when the inlet side is coming in, actually has a tiny, I believe it's charcoal filter. And that helps to clean some of the air before the oil is consolidated out of it inside of the catch can and clean air is vented back in. This one doesn't have a filter. So while this isn't necessarily cleaning as well as a good catch can might, what it is doing is trying to consolidate some of that oil as it comes in. So, resuming, we have the clean air coming out, and just to kind of show you the admittedly hack work that I did to make this work. So, we have the drip pan right back here, as I had mentioned, and then the hose that typically comes off of it, I actually cut in half. So, I cut it too short on this side, but normally you would have the sleeve that would typically slide right on as stock, and you wouldn't need this first hose clamp. But I cut it from the wrong side by accident, so I was like, I'm just gonna run it and hose clamp it on. If you do this, be very careful because that's plastic under there, so if you over tighten it, it'll snap your drip tray, and you're gonna need a new one. So then my stupid little catch can here, you can see it has these nipples that screwed right on. So I had some extra ones left over, and that was what I eventually used to serve as a venting point from that hose. So I literally just have the screw side jammed into the rubber hose that comes off of the drip tray, and then the nipple goes up into my hose. So that is the inlet side, goes into the catch can, does its venting, whatever comes back, runs back down, and this one's going into the throttle body. So again, this one I actually did properly. I just took the whole air intake deflector, that plastic boot right there. This is the throttle body right over here. So I just cut that one so that it was at the appropriate angle, and you can twist it and finagle it as needed once you get that metal hose clamp at the base down off, which is super easy to do. It's harder to get it back on. Then again, it's the same deal. I took one of the stupid nipples off of my garbage catch can, put the screw side in, hose clamp that one down, put the hose on that will be going to the outlet side of the catch can, and I hose clamp that on as well. So effectively we have a closed system here. in terms of the air and oil being vented from the drip tray, which is the high load area, which is exactly what I was looking for. Some of these curvatures may not be ideal because if you think about it, oily air, as it's cooling coming out of the motor, oil is going to condense and it might try and fight to get out of there. Ideally, you want it to probably be as level as possible with the hoses while that one is going basically vertical. This, again, is just a loose system. I want to start monitoring things. So this is not a final product. It's just kind of showing the concept and roughly how you would do it. So again, I have my hoses zip tied together because while these are fuel lines, keep in mind you want to use fuel hose because everything needs to be very heat tolerant considering engine bays get hot and the header is right down there. So additionally, just to kind of ensure that that doesn't make contact, you can see I have the hoses zip tied together all the way down so they stay tight with each other. And then just to kind of make a mounting point, I popped a hole in this trim piece right here and zip tied both the hoses on, cut the hose or the trim appropriately so that it could bend a little bit without tearing off of here. It does pop right off, but just extra security. So this is my catch can setup. Again, this is specific to the M272 because this engine has a very strange PCV system compared to other motors. Typically the way it would work is rather than venting through that air deflector or the top of the throttle body, something like that, what you would have is something, here, we'll use this side for comparison because this is more normal. You would have this vent and then it would essentially go straight into the intake manifold across. So all you would have to do is splice that hose down the middle, run one side, the inlet side, to your catch can, wherever it may be, run the outlet side into the intake manifold. That's it. Especially if you have a normal car that people modify, so not a Mercedes, then there's probably a kit out there for your car. And you can just buy it, slap it on, done. Has all the appropriate hardware, doesn't need to be zip tied in, etc. So I guess another point worth mentioning is why this matters. And in the case of this engine, it doesn't matter as much. I know that's kind of ridiculous after 11, 12 minutes of video, but when it comes to a catch can, the idea, again, is keeping everything clean in the intake manifold. So the reason that it doesn't matter as much for this engine is because this engine is port injected, which basically means these fuel injectors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those go straight into the intake manifold, which is where they combine with air, get fired down into the pistons or inhaled into the pistons, and you have combustion. So fuel is actually a pretty good cleaner. So a lot of that oil that's going to be in the intake manifold will get cleaned up by the fuel injectors. Whereas on newer motors or different motors that include direct injection, the fuel is not getting injected into the intake manifold. It's getting injected directly into the cylinder. So what that means is while the port-injected motor is going to have a lot of those cleaning properties, which will help the intake valves to stay clean and not gunk up because they're constantly getting a supply of fuel to clean them, a direct-injected motor has no real way to clean off the intake valves. So what you can get is carbon buildup, which is essentially a buildup of all that chunky oiliness, and it turns into a pretty hard, crusty layer, and that can ultimately result in a whole bunch of different issues, but the easiest way to clean that is walnut blasting, which there's a ton of videos on the internet if you want to see that and see what dirty valves look like on a direct injected motor. So that's not entirely relevant to this, but just keep in mind that if you do have a direct injected vehicle, it's actually more pertinent to run a catch can, even on a stock vehicle, than it would be on a port injected vehicle, because you're going to keep things that much cleaner and that much healthier. So that pretty much wraps it up with everything I wanted to discuss. Just for the sake of or point of reference, this catch can, my Amazon one, was $20. The hose, I think, was $15. Hose clamps were $3, and that's it. It's in-ish, and the car is now breathing through a catch can. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this car performs well at autocross tomorrow and doesn't cannibalize too much oil.